What is going on, everybody? I am Hoops and Hip Hop, and welcome to the 7th episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. In last week's episode, we did something a little bit different, and I actually gave you guys my tier list, if you will, for all of the starter Pokemon and kind of just how good I think each individual form of every starter Pokemon is. And that was a lot of fun. It seemed like you guys liked it a lot. And so in today's video, today's podcast, I should say, I kind of just wanted to do something similar. And so today we're going to kind of be doing the same type of thing, but with the evil teams. Now, the evil teams in Pokemon, as you probably know, are something that appear every single time. They're kind of a trope of the series, if you will, and they all bring with them their own unique flavor, their own unique style, and their own unique goals. And some are definitely better than others, and so I'm just going to tell you guys my thoughts about all of them, what I think about them, and basically my rankings of all the evil teams from worst to best. Now, that's going to be the one main difference here as opposed to the last episode where I did like a tier rank or a tier list and I was ranking them like in S tier, A tier, that sort of thing. We're not going to be doing that. I'm basically just going to be doing a worst to best type of scenario so I can give you guys the order of how much I like each of the evil teams, if that makes sense. So, I mean, without any further ado, I really don't have anything else to say. So with all that being said, oh my goodness, let's go ahead and get started. Now, there are a total of 6 evil teams, technically, if you lump Team Magma and Team Aqua together as both being in Generation 3, and you lump the Ether Foundation and Team Skull together as both being kind of the Generation 7 antagonists, which for all intents and purposes, that is the case, so that's what we're going to be doing. So starting off at the bottom of the list at number 6, I've actually got Team Flare. And the reason why I've got Team Flare here is, I mean, it's probably not too surprising just because of the fact that they always seem to kind of be the least liked evil team that we currently have. And so I guess I would say I share those sentiments. There is a part of me that kind of just really wants to give them the benefit of the doubt because they do come from Generation 6 and Pokemon X and Y, and I honestly love everything about those games, so I really just want to give them the shot that I don't think a lot of people tend to give them, but at the same time, I can't really deny that they just are, for all intents and purposes, they really are the worst evil team that we've seen so far. And the reason why I believe that is just because they seem overall kind of shallow. Like their whole goal is to create a quote-unquote beautiful world by essentially killing anything and everyone that they deem unworthy or ugly, quote-unquote. Which I think is probably the one redeeming thing about Team Flare, the fact that they just want to kill everyone. That's obviously a very dark type of thing, and it's nice to see those dark type of motives in Pokemon games, because it's nice to see Pokemon get a little mature, a little dark, that sort of thing, but it just doesn't hold water at the end of the day, unfortunately, because the way Team Flare decides to go about it, like I said, is just really, really shallow. Like, first off, even though their whole beautiful world goal is their goal, it really doesn't have a lot of depth. It just doesn't have a lot of backstory. Like, the plot is there just for the sake of the plot being there, and like you get the impression that there isn't really motivation on the part of Lysander, the evil team leader, to want to do that. Like, he obviously will go throughout the game explaining his reasonings and all that stuff, but you don't really like feel it as a player from my perspective. And so I just don't really feel like you can, as a player, latch on and get invested in what they're trying to do, because it just kind of feels like it's a plot device more than anything, and kind of gives you that out of world experience that, you know, this was kind of just put there to move the game forward, as opposed to being a real, true, living, breathing part of the game. And then another thing is that, like, their designs in general aren't the greatest. Like, I do feel like the way they look, from the grunts to the admins, I think they're just kind of, I wouldn't say, like, it's kind of ironic in a way, because I want to say that they're just kind of plain. They look kind of just basic, which is very funny because Team Flare is all about fashion and style, and they want to pop out. But I feel like just when I imagine them in my head, they kind of just, I just think about the fact that they're nothing but like orange. They're just kind of like an orange blob of a person or persons, and they just don't really stand out a whole lot, which is very ironic considering all their goals and stuff. And when it comes to the admins specifically, all of the admins, like a minus Zero Sick, who plays a part in the post game, are like more or less the same kind of looking character, where they all have like different hair colors, but that's the only thing that kind of differentiates them, and they all look extremely similar outside of that. So I think the main problem, kind of just from every angle with Team Flare, is that they just don't have a lot of depth to them at all. They don't have a lot of depth to their motives. They don't have a lot of depth to their characters. There's just not a whole lot going on there that really makes them an enjoyable villain, outside of the fact that, once again, they want to casually kill everyone, and I think that's cool, but the execution of that goal is kind of bad. So that's why they end up at the bottom of the list there. And then moving into number 5, I have got Team Galactic. Team Galactic is at my number 5 spot. And the reason why I have Team Galactic at number 5, and this might be kind of a controversial pick, because I know a lot of people do love Team Galactic and they love Gen 4 and all that stuff, but I remember playing Pokemon Diamond and Pearl for the first time when I was about 12 years old, and getting introduced to Team Galactic while I was playing the game, because at that point, not only was there not the amount of internet coverage that we have for Pokemon games at this point, but I personally didn't have access to the internet either. So I found out about things in the game when I played the game, which is honestly the way it should be. I wish I could go back to a time where I could play a Pokemon game, or any game for that matter, completely blind and just experience it like for myself. Sadly, I don't think that's going to happen unless I become a hermit and just decide to renounce my YouTube career and renounce the internet in general. I just don't think it would ever happen, sadly. But at the time, that's how I was experiencing Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. So when I was introduced to Team Galactic for the first time, and they said their names, they said, "We are Team Galactic," or something to that effect, it kind of just hit me in a way that I felt like that name didn't really roll off the tongue. It didn't really sound like a good name. And then from there, it kind of just seemed like Team Galactic, they were kind of just a bunch of tryhards. They were just trying too hard to be like cool or intense or like scary, I guess you could say. And it just, to me, it didn't really work as good experiencing it as that 12-year-old kid as, say, Team Magma or Team Aqua, or even Team Rocket. Like, those teams all very much felt to me like they belonged, like they made sense and all that stuff. But when I heard the name Team Galactic, I was just like, I don't know, that sounds kind of like a reach to me. That's how I remember experiencing it as a 12-year-old kid. Now that I am basically like an adult and can evaluate it a little more critically, I don't quite think that way. I don't think Team Galactic are tryhards. And there are some redeeming qualities about them, like the fact that they obviously want to start a whole new universe with the power of Dialga and Palkia. Like, that is obviously like prime time evil villain type of stuff, where you don't want to just take over the world. You don't want to just take over a city. You literally want to destroy the universe and start a new one that's like your design. Like, that's about as big as you can go. And then also, this was kind of the generation that started the whole like setup for I guess you could say, the lore and the plot of the Pokemon world we have today, where we've got multiple timelines, we've got stuff going on with like infinity energy, and just like there's a whole lot of mumbo jumbo relating to space and time and timelines and all that stuff, which started with Generation 4. So we probably have Generation 4 to thank for this kind of direction with the lore that the Pokemon franchise has decided to take, which I think is really enjoyable. So I definitely do applaud Team Galactic for that. But as far as like negatives that I have, because they only made it into the number 5 spot, I would say that for as like prime time as their goal is to basically just destroy the universe, I also think it kind of goes along with my original 12-year-old thought of them kind of being a try-hard team, because I feel like it kind of went from like Generation 1, where we had Team Rocket, where they were basically just thugs, bad guys, kind of like a mafia, if you will, that were just trying to like basically make money, like build an empire, but they weren't like crazy at the same time. Their goals were very much believable. And then you had Team Magma and Team Aqua in Gen 3, which not only had the very interesting dynamic of opposing each other as well as opposing you, but then you also had the situation where they wanted to expand the land, expand the sea, which I mean, that is obviously a little bit crazy, like in terms of just like an individual's goal in life, but once again, it was a little more relatable. And then in Generation 4, we jumped up like 5 rungs on the ladder, and all of a sudden we want to like take over the entire universe, which was a bit of a leap from Generation 3, I will say. So like, even looking back on it, I feel like there is this sense of like try-heartedness where they kind of just went a little bit too far with what Team Galactic was trying to do. And so those first impressions of Team Galactic have always stuck in my mind for that reason. But there are some endearing things about them, like I said, them setting up the whole plot and lore of the franchise. In Pokemon Platinum, we also got introduced to the Distortion world thanks to them, which was really cool and obviously had to do with their plot line. And then I really do love Cyrus as a character. I love how he's silent, he's cold, he's very like intimidating, and that's what an evil team leader should be. So I give him props for that. But overall, yeah, Team Galactic hits my number 5 spot for those reasons. And then moving into the number 4 spot, we have Team Aqua and Magma. And it's funny because obviously I just barely mentioned them as kind of being a precursor to Generation 5 in terms of, or Generation 4's Team Galactic in terms of the goals and aspirations and whatnot. And frankly, I have nothing bad to say about Team Galactic. Like, I definitely do have criticisms for those other 2 teams that I just mentioned, but I can't really say I have a legitimate criticism for Team Magma and Team Aqua. Obviously, they were one of the earlier evil teams, but at the same time, they introduced the very interesting idea of opposing each other as well as opposing the evil team. And then depending on which version of the game you played, you obviously encountered one of the 2 teams. And then in Emerald, you encountered both of them, which was like the best of both worlds, and it was awesome. So I really loved that mechanic and that feature between those 2. And so regardless of any of their like other traits, they get a lot of points just for introducing that unique concept. But then in terms of like their motivations, like I said, like it's kind of crazy. It's kind of like out there, if you will. But I don't know, like it just seems way more relatable to me. Like I can understand it. I can get invested in their ideas of wanting to expand the land or sea more so than I can get invested into Team Flare just wanting to make a beautiful world, whatever that means, and then Team Galactic just straight up wanting to destroy the universe. So that combined with their whole like opposite 2-team dynamic, I think works really well for them in terms of just having a goal to work towards. And then I personally also feel that in the games themselves, the buildup of their plot and their goals and just like the climax of the game, the climax of the games themselves that ultimately ended up with Team Magma or Team Aqua, like, awakening Groudon on Kyogre, and then you're stuck in either the state of, like, perpetual rain or really harsh sunlight that occurs. And like, playing the game for myself, I thought that build up to that point was really, really good. And when you were in that point of the harsh sunlight or the perpetual rain, like, I remember really feeling a sense of intensity, a sense of, holy crap, this is real. Like, the evil team is, like, doing their thing. Like, they're really going after it. And I really had a sense of realism come over me in that moment, which got me more immersed into the game. And that speaks volumes for those evil teams as well, because once again, like, it shows how, like, believable their goals and their intentions can be, to the point where I can really get wrapped up into what's going on in the game, and it's not kind of just, it's not too unbelievable to me. Like, for instance, with Team Galactic, once again, going back to them, you obviously had Cyrus, who was trying to create a new world, and then in Platinum, he takes you to the Distortion world, and obviously, that's kind of some crazy stuff. That's a big deal. But that never really felt as real or intense to me as the perpetual sun, harsh sunlight. Like, I could relate a little more to it. Like, the build up, the process towards that moment was a little bit better. And so I just feel like Team Magma and Team Aqua were a much more well-executed team in terms of their goals and how they fit into the storyline and all that stuff. And then there's really no negatives I have to say about them either. And so that's why they get my number 4 spot. But then moving into the number 3 spot, which is basically the middle of the ladder here, and the bronze medal, if you will, and that would be the Ether Foundation and Team Skull. Now, the reason why I put these two together is because they do really work in tandem, and Team Skull, even though they're kind of the resident evil team, if you will, they don't really do a whole lot without the Ether Foundation. The Ether Foundation and Lusamine are obviously the main antagonists of the games as you get into the story, and Team Skull kind of just serve as a face at the beginning of the game. That's part of the plot line, is that they're supposed to look like the bad guys, and then it kind of flips, and then the Ether Foundation are the bad guys. Hopefully none of you have played Sun and Moon, because I'm throwing out some major spoilers here, or at least you've beaten it, but yeah, so Team Skull really didn't do a whole lot without the Ether Foundation, and so I think it's important to kind of group them together, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I will give them the number 3 spot, because kind of in contrast to Team Magma and Team Aqua, like, opposing each other, this was the first time since then that we had kind of a 2 evil team setup here. But this time we had them working with each other, where one of them was essentially a front for the other, and one was doing all the dirty work for the evil mastermind that was Lusamine and the Ether Foundation. So I thought that was a really cool plot device that really kind of pushed the plot forward in a really engaging way and provided for a really good plot twist, which I definitely give them bonus points for that. I know that kind of has to do with the story in general of the games as opposed to the evil team specifically, but the evil team a lot of times is the thing that pushes the story forward. So I really loved the way that these 2 evil teams pushed the story forward in that way. I thought it was really nice. And then when it comes to, like, their motives and stuff, with Lusamine essentially just wanting to escape to Ultra Space with her aliens and stuff like that, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of, like, how her character ended up, because basically she just ended up as, like, a psychotic, like, whack job that just was blind to anything else but wanting to escape into Ultra Space. I felt like, I mean, she definitely did the job of, like, wanting to beat her down, because she definitely was psycho, but I feel like, kind of similar to Team Flare, that motivation was a little bit shallow. I would have preferred something that was a little more kind of understandable from a rational, like, person's perspective, as opposed to just crazy for the sake of being crazy, bad for the sake of being bad, that type of thing. But Lusamine did have a lot of redeeming qualities as well, in the fact that she was the mother of Lily, who is, like, one of the most important characters in the game and one of your closest friends in the game, and also Gladion, who is like your rival in the game, and finding out that not only is she the mother to both of those characters, but those two characters are brother and sister, that was a really huge moment in the game. Like, looking back on it now and seeing how they all have like blonde hair and they all look alike, it seems kind of obvious, but playing through the game for the first time, like, it's definitely not something that I was thinking about. So to find that out in the game was a really cool thing that really got me invested into the plot of the games. And that's thanks to, once again, the Aether Foundation and Team Skull. So that kind of depth I really enjoy out of the Aether team, or out of the Aether Foundation. And then that's not even like the end of that in terms of the depth and all the different storylines they provide, because you also have their father in Moan, who was basically the first guy to discover an ultra wormhole. He's kind of the reason why Lusamine is the way she is. But then later in the game, through kind of just like different references and kind of just putting different puzzle pieces together, you find out that Moan is the father to Lusamine and Gladion, and Moan is none other than the guy who runs Poképlock, which is obviously like that side mini-game type of mechanic for Pokemon Sun and Moon. And because that's such a carefree, like, lax part of the game, and Moan is such a carefree, lax character, it's kind of mind-blowing to find out that he is their father. And this even becomes referenced in I believe it's in Ultra Sun and Moon, where Moan actually ends up at the Aether Foundation, has a conversation with, I think it's Lusamine, but he doesn't have his memory. Like, something happened to him to where his memory is completely gone. But just having that little extra layer there where there's a father of these characters to find out, and it becomes this like completely crazy character that you wouldn't expect, once again adds more depth to the story. And then when it comes to Team Skull even provides a little bit of depth to their characters as well, because after the end of the game, you are able to find out through kind of inferred dialogue when you go to Guzma's house that is on Route 2, that Guzma was kind of like an abused child a little bit. You find out different things in the game that kind of imply that he had a rough childhood, that he was abused. He was kind of like, he didn't have like the nurturing, caring childhood that every child deserves. And so that's kind of what led him to maybe lashing out a little bit more and ultimately ending up the way he is. And having that kind of relatability in a villain is always something I think is like super like important, and I believe it makes for the best quality villain you could have, because if you can like understand why the villain is doing what they're doing instead of just realizing that they're evil for the sake of being evil, that makes for an immensely better character and a better story overall. And Guzma did that to a certain extent, so I give them major props for that. But then getting into the number 2 spot, the runner-up in my list, I should say, is Team Plasma. Now, this is kind of an interesting pick for me, because if you follow me or my channel, or just have heard me talk in general at all, there's a good chance you have heard me talk about how I'm not a fan of Gen 5. Or I should say I'm not that much of a fan of Gen 5. Because in terms of the Pokemon designs, the Pokemon designs are my least favorite. The region is kind of just my least favorite. Like, there's a lot of things about Generation 5 that are my least favorite in the franchise. But when it does come to the evil team, Team Plasma, I will say they are a great evil team. One of the things that Generation 5 gets the most praise for is its story, because it's got this really interesting story about the morality of Pokemon and whether catching Pokemon is good. And it kind of basically put that real world controversy about Pokemon that was around in the 90s with whether or not Pokemon was like promoting like dog fighting or animal abuse or whatever. It kind of put that into the plot of an actual game, which was really a bold move by Game Freak to kind of address those criticisms in that way. And it did kind of make you ask those questions as the player to a certain degree, which once again made a relatable kind of villain, which was really, really cool. And I have really just grown to appreciate Team Plasma over the years for things like that, even though they do appear in the generation that's my least favorite. And just like with Team Galactic, where I said that, like, hearing their name for the first time and getting introduced to them, I kind of felt like it was a bit of a stretch. I did kind of feel like that with Team Plasma as well, because once again, with Generation 5, I experienced the game the same way I did Generation 4. Didn't really have much of any, like, knowledge beforehand about the games, because I didn't really look on the internet for information about the games at that time. And so when I first was introduced to Team Plasma and I heard their names, Team Plasma, I remember thinking, like, Team Plasma, like, what kind of a name is that? Like, that doesn't sound like the Team Rockets, the Team Magmas, the Team Aquas that I know. And once again, I thought it was kind of a try-hard type of team. But the reason why they are named Team Plasma is actually very, very ingenious, and I haven't looked at this detail in a while, so don't quote me directly. I'm kind of paraphrasing here. But the reason why they're named Team Plasma, I believe, has to do with like the plasma state of being, or like, I want to say maybe even it has to do with like the plasma in like your blood, where it's kind of like the process of getting plasma has to do with like separating it from its base components that like make up, like in the case of like your own blood, you have all these different components that make up your blood, and then you have the plasma, and like in order to get the plasma, you obviously have to separate it from those base components. And that's kind of like the philosophy behind the name, is that it's representative of Team Plasma's goals, where they're trying to separate Pokemon from their trainers. And I think just like that kind of thought that's being put into the name, where unlike Team Magma, Aqua, Galactic, where it's kind of just descriptive of what they're trying to go for, like in an obvious sense, Team Plasma kind of does it in a different sense, where you kind of have, there's more to it than meets the eye. You kind of have to do research to figure out the true meaning. It's not as obvious. And I really like that, because I really love when research, thought, and effort is put into different things like that. And so overall, Team Plasma just is a really, really good evil team in every way, shape, and form. I haven't even mentioned N yet, who is arguably the best villain we've ever seen in a Pokemon game, once again, because he is extremely relatable. So, I mean, I am kind of running a little bit low on time, so I don't have time to give the whole spiel on N that I would like, but he is a fantastic villain, extremely relatable, which is personally what I want to see out of villains in Pokemon games, and he contributed greatly to Team Plasma being one of the best evil teams we've ever seen. But then getting into the number one spot, as I'm sure you've probably already figured out by now, since they're the only ones we haven't talked about, we have Team Rocket. Now, the thing I want to say about Team Rocket before we get into anything else is the fact that my selection of them as my number one pick has nothing to do with nostalgia or anything like that. I know that might seem like a cop-out answer to have Team Rocket be the number one, because obviously they're the originals, they're the ones from Generation 1 that we all know and love, we grew up with, blah, 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 but it really doesn't have anything to do with those factors as far as me picking them to be number one. The reason why I like Team Rocket so much is because, number one, you can feel their presence. They definitely feel like a legitimately evil team, and you don't really feel like they're evil for the sake of being evil as well. Like, their goals are extremely relatable in that they're just kind of like a mafia type group who's out to basically do anything they can do to get power and money. And that involves obviously stealing Pokemon, that involves taking over powerful organizations within the Kanto region that they can use to get leverage and therefore power on the region. Like, they're not about like taking over the world, like going to a new universe. They don't have these like astronomical goals that in a way are kind of like, for as grandiose as they are also, like I've been saying, a little less believable and therefore a little less engaging compared to something that's a little more like literally down to earth, where Team Rocket just basically wants to get money and get it in any way they can, and they want power as well. And I think it's really endearing, especially compared to those other goals that kind of just seem a little too out there to really be believable. And that's kind of what I really like about Team Rocket, is that they're relatable, they're believable, they have goals that like are definitely evil, that definitely need to be stopped, but it's not so crazy that you're like, okay, this is ridiculous. And then the characters themselves are always obviously also great. You obviously have Jesse and James from the anime, who are fantastic, and you've also got Giovanni, who I think is one of the best evil team leaders that we have ever seen, especially considering the fact that we learned in Heart Gold and Soul Silver that Silver, your rival in those games, is his son. That adds even more depth to him, which is awesome. And then you had the fact that he was actually the 8th gym leader, who was like, it was a secret at the time, and then you find that out at the end of the game. That was an amazing plot point, especially for the Gen 1 games, which were especially primitive. And so, I mean, I just really love everything that Team Rocket goes for. Like, obviously they do have the advantage of being the first, being the original, but that doesn't really factor into my decision. Like I said, I just really love that they're kind of like a gangsta organization that just wants money, they just want power, and they're not about those crazy, like, whack job type of goals, which are okay in their own right, but I just personally prefer the level of evilness, if you will, that Team Rocket is at, and that's why they are my number one. But with all that being said, that is pretty much my list, that is my ranking, and if you made it this far, I sincerely thank you guys for listening and checking out the podcast, because it really means a lot. If you guys would like to let me know your own rankings for the Evil Team members, definitely leave a comment below. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Spotify or iTunes or anywhere else, you can reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, any of those. And you can also check out the UCast Studios Twitter handle as well as YouTube. And if you haven't yet, be sure to follow and or subscribe wherever you listen, because we are doing these episodes every Friday and it's a whole lot of fun. So I hope you guys will stick around for future episodes. And pretty much that's all I have to say. If you guys would like to check me out on my personal YouTube channel as well, I would absolutely invite you to do that. I'm almost to 100,000 subscribers, which is mind-blowing, so I would love to have you over there. But yeah, with all that being said, we'll be back with another episode on next Friday. I'm definitely looking forward to the topic we've got to discuss for that week. And with all that being said, once again, thank you for watching. I will see you guys next week, and I hope you all have a great day. Peace.